When warming up for sandbags, I think of two things. One, getting everything warm so I don't injure myself, and two, getting the glutes ready to move some weight. I might also say reminding everything else to let the glutes do their job. The reasoning behind this is simple. In addition to the glute max being the largest muscle in the body, the glutes are responsible for extending the hips, and power, at least in large part, comes from the hips. Whether it's a jump, a throw, a tackle, a hip drive kind of squat, or lifting a sandbag, it's all about the hips. It's also been my experience that when you get the glutes working right, everything else just kind of falls into place. The low back and hamstrings won't need to work as hard when lifting a sandbag from the ground. Tension is taken off the knees. You'll have more power lifting a sandbag from your lap, meaning a better chance at shouldering it, and you'll generally just feel more stable on your feet when you give your glutes the chance to assist your core in keeping you upright. With these things in mind, the first part of every warm-up I do is the hip flexor stretch. Sedentary lifestyles filled with lots of sitting means it's easy for the hip flexors to get tight. This is a problem because not only can tight hip flexors lead to hip pain, but they essentially work in direct opposition to what we're trying to accomplish with the warm-up. The glutes extend the hips, the flexors, as the name implies, flex them, and it's much more difficult to properly utilize your glutes when your chronically tight and shortened hip flexors are there acting as a block. At the start of every warm-up, I do the hip flexor stretch for at least 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes more, going back and forth between sides for about 30 seconds at a time. That might seem like a while, but this is also when I watch cool lifting videos to get myself pumped up for my workout, something I'd be doing anyway, so really the stretch is just making that time more productive. To do the stretch, get into a kneeling position, take a knee as they say, with your kneeling leg as far back as you can get it, and your arm from that same side posted on something solid. I like to rest my hand on my sandbag. I recommend putting something soft under your knee too if you can, just because you'll be in this position for a long time. I use a workout mat, but anything soft will do. Once you're in position, shift your weight forward until you feel a deep stretch in your hip on the side of your kneeling leg. You can intensify the stretch by flexing your glutes. For example, if your left knee is on the ground, you'd flex your butt on that side. You can also take it even further by manually pushing yourself forward with your hand. Just make sure when you do this, you're actually flexing your glutes and shifting your hips forward, not just arching your lower back. It really depends on the day with this one. I'll just keep doing the stretch until I no longer feel any resistance. It could take 5 minutes, it could take 15. The best way to test for any lingering hip flexor tension is with the second warm-up stretch, the deep squat. To do this one, take a wider than shoulder width stance, point your toes out to the sides a few degrees, squat down to the bottom, and push your knees out with your elbows. Hold the position for roughly 30 seconds. If your hip flexors are still tight, you'll feel it in this position, which is a sign you'll need to spend more time doing the hip flexor stretch. After the initial 5 to 10 minutes spent stretching the hips, I'll start going back and forth between these two until I reach the point where I can comfortably sit in the deep squat position without any unwanted tension. Quick tip, if you're really struggling one day, you can add mini pulses to your hip flexor stretch. Flex your glute for about half a second, relax, flex again, and continue for 30 reps or so. That always helps me. The next part of the warm-up is the child's pose stretch. This one opens up the thoracic spine and will make it easier for you to lift a sandbag high up on your chest or onto your shoulder. There are two variations of the stretch I like to do. First, both knees on the ground, reach your hands overhead as far as you can, shrug your shoulders like you would at the top of an overhead press, and place your hands on the ground. From here, shift your hips back and pull the ground towards you with your hands until you feel a stretch in your upper back. Hold this position for 30 seconds and complete for 1 or 2 rounds. The second variation is similar, only you won't be shrugging your shoulders. Place your hands on the ground and retract your scapula, shoulders back. You don't need to do this step, but it will give you some perspective and it makes the next step easier. From here, fully protract your scapula, shoulders forward. Maintain that protraction and again shift your hips back while pulling the ground towards you with your hands. When done correctly, you should feel the muscles in your mid-back light up. It's a cool feeling if you've never experienced it before. I usually do this variation for 1 or 2 rounds of 30 seconds. After that is an external rotation stretch for the shoulders. A stick or some kind of dowel works great for this, but a resistance band or rope, a towel, or anything else can work too, provided it's long enough. This one further opens up the shoulders and prepares you for shouldering a sandbag. If you've ever gone for a shoulder attempt and thrown the sandbag just a bit too far, you'll know how tough that can be on the shoulders, trying to gain control when the sandbag is doing everything it can to fall behind you. Working with this stretch can help to prepare you for that just in case. knees, so if it does happen, you'll be more likely to make it through without any trouble. The easiest way I can think of to describe this one is, lift your arm up like you would to flex your bicep, elbow at roughly 90 degrees, hold the stick or whatever you have in the crease between your thumb and index finger so it points directly behind you, then allow it to fall back against the outside of your arm and wrap your fingers around it. In this position, grab the bottom of the stick with your other hand and gently pull it forward, forcing your shoulder to externally rotate. Start with just a small amount of pressure and increase it gradually over time as your mobility improves. Hold this stretch for 30 seconds on each side and repeat for 1 or 2 rounds. Next is an overhead mobility drill. This one isn't quite as necessary if you don't plan on doing any overhead pressing in your workout, but it doesn't take long and it always leaves my shoulders feeling great, so I figure it's worth it either way. Lie on your back with your knees bent and place both arms on the ground in a double biceps pose. From here, the goal is to reach your arms all the way overhead while keeping them in contact with the floor at all times and also keeping your low back completely flat against the ground, no arching. Slowly move your arms overhead, reaching as far as you can, then bring them back down and repeat for 5 to 10 reps. Complete for 2 or 3 rounds. If you get any impingement when pressing overhead, this is a good way to get rid of it. Next is some self-myofascial release, fancy way of saying massaging a muscle to increase mobility. This is often done with a foam roller, though I don't have one myself. I just use my power rack. A counter or door frame will get the job done too. Really, you just need something hard. The first spot is right under the armpits. I'll press that area against the side of my power rack and apply pressure, going back and forth for 30 repetitions, and I'll do that 1 or 2 times per side. This made a noticeable difference in mobility for me, though I do a ridiculous amount of neutral grip pull-ups, which is probably the reason I end up with a lot of tension there. It may or may not be necessary for you. The other area I'll do this with is on the underside of my arms, directly above the elbow. I had some tendinitis in the past, and that experience really proved to me how effective this technique can be. I'll put that spot on the safety bar on my power rack. Again though, like I said, anything can work. The edge of a counter is a good option. And I'll rotate forward and back, sometimes in a circular motion, for 30 reps per arm for 1 or 2 rounds. This goes a long way towards keeping the elbows happy. Last but not least, before getting to the main dynamic part of the warm-up, is preparing the ankles and knees. For the knees, I highly recommend these mini squats. I learned about these from Jeff Cavalier a decade ago, and as someone who had multiple knee injuries in the past, they changed my life. Basically, the movement is just a short 1 to maybe 3-inch range of motion squat done forcefully. You can do the same in a lunge position too. I do both. This wakes up the knees and gets you ready for deep knee bend movements. If you ever have trouble with what feels like grinding or clicking in your knees when doing any kind of squat, these will help. I try to get at least 50 to 100 reps per knee. For the ankles, I'll do calf stretch pulses, stand up and reach one leg back, getting into a kind of sprinter's stance. Hold on to something with your hands if you can to make the balance easier, and reach the heel on your back leg towards the ground for reps. Each time you should feel a stretch in your lower leg. Again, 50 to 100 reps per ankle is a good goal. This marks the end of the first part of the warm-up, which was more like a primer, getting your body moving right. Next is a collection of movements I like to cycle through for 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little more depending on how I'm feeling that day, each focused more on warming up the muscles and again on making sure the glutes are ready to lift some weight. Keep in mind, as I cycle through each of these, I will also periodically go back to those hip flexor and deep squat stretches every couple minutes, just to double down on that part. I basically never stop stretching the hip flexors during the warm-up. First, there's the band pull-apart. Take a light band, hold it out in front of you with both hands at about shoulder height, and pull it apart. This can be done with both double overhand and underhand grips. I recommend doing your reps quickly. The point is blood flow, not muscle damage. Next, there's the band curl, done with underhand, neutral, and overhand grips. These should also be done quickly, again, just going for the pump. I recommend flexing your glutes while you do each of these. It doesn't take any extra work, and it will make a difference. There's the band good morning, preferably done with a heavier band. These should mimic actual heavy lifting. Done right, they'll get your glutes working and remind your body what it feels like to be explosive. At the top of every rep, take a deep breath and brace and squeeze your glutes. Slowly lower down to the bottom while thinking hips back rather than bend forward. Once you reach the bottom position, explode back up to the top by raising your chest, extending your hips, and flexing your glutes hard. Think kettlebell swings here, or trying to throw something as hard as you can up and over your head. Everything else so far during the warm-up has been somewhat passive. You can get through most of it with your mind kinda turned off, but these band good mornings are your transition to the actual workout, to actually lifting heavy sandbags. They must be done with explosive intent. If you don't have a heavy band, plate or kettlebell swings work great here as well. If you don't have anything, at the very least, doing some hip thrusts will help, though I really do recommend getting a band if you can. There's also basic bodyweight squats. I always feel more locked in when I can mimic having a bar on my back, probably just from all the time I spent with barbell back squats, so I like to hold my band in a low bar squat position, squeezing it into my back like I would a bar, taking a deep breath at the top of every rep, and finishing each rep by flexing my glutes. You can do this without the band if you prefer, just make sure these are powerful, like the good mornings. These 4 movements make up the majority of this section. I'll rotate back and forth between each one, doing sets of 20 to 50 at a time, and aim for a total of at least 200 to 300 reps for the pull-aparts and curls, and 100 to 200 reps for the squats and good mornings. You'll want to make sure you're getting those reps in, especially if you only have one sandbag and it's heavy. That way, you'll be ready for that heavy weight, rather than just going in hoping for the best. The last 2 things are wrist circles and spinal decompression. To do the wrist circle, clasp your fingers from both hands together and rotate in a circular motion. I'll do this for about 20 rotations at a time, completing 3 to 5 rounds. Decompression could be either hanging from a pull-up bar or wedging yourself up against a counter or table. My favorite method is using the safety on a power rack. Set the safety bar an inch or 2 below your waist and wedge yourself against it, knees bent, feet firmly planted on the ground. From here, push your hands into the bar and slowly shift your weight forward. You'll feel complete spinal decompression, way more than simply hanging in my experience, though hanging is good too, and rotating between both is probably best. I do this for 10 to 20 seconds, 5 to 10 times, spread throughout the warm-up. And that's it for this section. During this part, I'll just move back and forth between each thing until I've hit those rep goals. It doesn't need to be ultra strict or anything. During this time, I'll still be watching cool lifting stuff to get motivated. The entire routine might take 10 minutes, it might take half an hour. It all depends on how much you want to put into it and on how stiff you are on a given day. Now that you've made it through the basic warm-up, one step remains. If you have multiple sandbags, use your lightest one here. If you only have one, that's fine too, just use that. Here's what I do. Using perfect form, focusing on keeping my lower back as flat as I'm able, using leg drive, and breathing and bracing correctly, taking the deepest breath possible, I'll lift a sandbag from the ground to my lap, then from my lap to my chest as powerfully as I can. Once the sandbag is at chest height, I'll hold it there for 5 to 10 seconds, squeezing it with every bit of strength I have, while also getting my body used to leaning backwards with a weight in my hands. A bit of backwards lean is often required when lifting heavy, bulky sandbags, and this is a great place to get some practice in. Some guys overdo it, but leaning back gives the sandbag more of a shelf to rest on, which takes some of the burden off your arms and helps to prevent the sandbag from falling forward. While bear hugging the sandbag as tightly as I can and keeping my core braced, I'll squeeze my glutes and lean back as far as is comfortable, leaning at the hips and placing tension on the glutes, rather than arching my lower back. If you've ever seen overhead pressing from back in the day when it was part of Olympic lifting, or more recently the starting strength style overhead press, it's the same concept. After those 5 to 10 seconds, I'll set the sandbag back on the ground and move on to the next step, which is 5 to 10 seconds of decompression again. After that, it's some isometric grip work. I use a gripper, but if you don't have one, that's fine. Just squeezing your fists or a towel or the side of a power rack works too. There's nothing special about the gripper, it's just convenient. Basically here, I'll just give everything I have for 5 to 10 seconds at a time, squeezing my hand as tightly as I can, attacking that gripper as if I'm doing some kind of max effort lift, and I'll do that for both hands. This is one of those tricks I'll always swear by. Something about the grip is tied directly to that deep-seated central nervous system power. I found doing some short, intense, max effort grip work as part of my warm-up makes it much easier to tap into that do-or-die kind of power needed for sandbags. I first discovered this back when I was doing a lot of grip work with stones. I'd walk around my yard squeezing this smaller, probably 15-pound stone in my hand, and I'd reach a point where it'd feel like the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, like the grip work somehow tapped directly into that fight response. It's like having someone slap you on the back or getting a whiff of ammonia. It wakes you up. Finally, and this might not be necessary for you, I'll massage the area around my elbows for about 5 to 10 seconds each. This makes a huge difference for me in keeping the elbow tendinitis away. I'll repeat this cycle: lift, decompress, grippers, elbows, 5 times through, and that's it. Then it's straight on to the workout. You might not need everything I listed, and I'm sure there are many more things out there that could be added to this routine, but this is what's worked for me, and I hope it helps you out. If you're looking for a heavy sandbag lifting program, consider checking out my book, Sandbag Hypertrophy, over on Amazon, link below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.